Carmen Sandiego project is a little research project Nick and I here have been working on for some time now. And I would love to introduce right now my esteemed research partner, Nick Petrillo, a great guy and friend to small animals as well.
Nope, not anything over a dog. I'm a total asshole too.
Yeah, it's true. I've seen him kick things. Anyway, so I'm Don Bailey. I work for ISAC Partners, and we're talking about mobile research, tracking people, information gathering, things of that nature. You know, it's funny. I don't know if anybody here played in the Hacker Poker Invitational last night because I can't see too well. But it's funny, kind of how that actually relates, right? Because poker's all about information gathering, what you can get from your opponent, how you can read people, how that information correlates to an end goal, right? And this is the exact same thing. We're taking broken pieces of information, resources from all over the place, many different areas of technology, and we're trying to amass them into one comprehensive tool, which unfortunately, due to various APIs and things, we tend to fail. But the idea is sound that you have all these resources, you can pull them together and hopefully harness it into a pretty elegant tool. And we're getting there, step by step, but still a little ways off. But with that said, I will let Mr. D. Petrillo dive right into the actual material.
So we were going to make this Bill and Ted themed, but Don didn't like that, so that's your only Bill and Ted reference for the rest of the presentation. So for references, you won't be seeing the awesome references that was at the other GSM talk right before this and at the beginning of Blackhat. Ours kind of suck, so there's more there.
But the point is that all this stuff is online on that website, the CarmenSandiegoProject.com/references. There's also a link to it on the main page. So we do throw out a lot of acronyms. We use acronyms obsessively. So if you get annoyed and say, hey, what the heck is that guy saying, you can reference it there.
And if you've been to all the other GSM talks here, you should know these by now. So moving right along.
All right, so this is just our basic introduction slide, which is pretty much a summary of what I really just said. We want to know everything about you, right? That's the goal of information gathering. It's the goal of information gathering from a civilian point of view as well as a military point of view. If I don't have access to the resources that the military and the government does, I still need that information for whatever nefarious or altruistic purposes I particularly have. So we want to know. We want to know where you are. We want to know why you're there. We want to know who you're talking to. We want to know where you're going to be going. We want to know where you're most vulnerable. And the pieces of information we've been able to amass at least give us a pretty decent window into that.
And we want to do it as stealthily as possible. We want to do it as covertly as possible. We want to maximize our success while we're minimizing our risk. So all the intelligence gathering capabilities that we're just going to show off today, every time you can give an attacker an advantage, that's never a good thing. So all the little granular pieces of information, they just help that person craft that attack to an individual or to a specific provider, et cetera, et cetera. And that just, again, minimizes their exposure, maximizes the successfulness of their attack. Do they even have an attack vector to play here? If they don't, then don't bother, because that might expose you if it fails.
Well said. So we did want to touch real quick on SS7. As everybody here knows, SS7 is the golden goose, right? SS7 is great. Gives you pretty much everything you'd ever want to have, except there are a lot of problems with that. SS7 is hard to get for most people. A lot of people.
For most people.
For most people. There are people, maybe even in this audience, probably wearing a black cardigan somewhere near the front, who could easily get access to SS7. But guys like, average Joes like myself and Nick, it's not necessarily easy. And it's expensive. And there are a lot of caveats as well. I mean, you've got to sign peer agreements. You have to deal with provider capabilities. You have to ensure that you're playing by the rules because everybody's always out to detect bad actors. And that comes with a lot of responsibility and a lot of, obviously potential problems. If you're trying to abuse the system just to test it, not even to do anything malicious, if somebody catches you, your provider says, hey, you know what? This is kind of shady. We don't necessarily agree with this, even though it's not necessarily bad. Terms of service, blah, 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 you're done. You're out a bunch of money. You've got a bunch of equipment left over that you maybe can sell off for a fraction of what you paid for. But the result is it's probably not going to turn out the way you want it to. So our goal, our entire goal for this project was to be able to access similar resources or the same resources that we would have access to with direct access to SS7 while bypassing SS7 as a whole. Right? So we don't have to worry about those caveats. We don't have to worry about the expense. We're doing it from a cost-effective point of view and from a completely stealth point of view, so that if we ever have the luxury of getting into SS7, great. That's awesome. It'll enhance what we already have.
Anonymous access.
Anonymous access, yeah. But we can't guarantee that we can keep it, and we can't guarantee that it's not going to go away, in however many years or months or whatever. So that's the main focus. And also, I wanted to touch very briefly here. SS7 does have other problems as well. So many researchers today, very intelligent individuals, they do not necessarily have access to SS7 within the United States, and that comes with a touch of a problem. The United States SS7 providers do have a lot of different technologies put into place that detect bad actors and also mitigate the potential for bad actors. And a lot of that is implemented through firewalls that are actually tuned. They're SS7 specific firewalls, so you can actually firewall map or firewall whatever particular protocol underlying that there may be. And those issues are actually going to create problems for the researcher within the United States. It's my understanding, and I could be wrong about this, so caveat, but it's a little bit more open in the European Union. And as you will see, as we will describe, a lot of our research does demonstrate that that's true.
Yeah. And if you're a government, some other government, and you've got a lot of money, getting anonymous access to SS7 or buying some third world country bankrupt cell phone network that already has SS7 equipment and connections and contracts in place, that's good and all, but you don't need this stuff if that's the case.
We'd all love to travel to the Congo on a weekly basis, but it's not in my budget right now. I'll let you cover this next.
Oh, okay. So Tobias Engel from the CCC at 25C3 in Germany gave a wonderful talk and wrote a paper about HLR. And one of the things about HLR is that it gives you lots of great information, lots of great intelligence that you normally wouldn't get from looking at a person's handset externally. So for fractions of a cent per query through some third-party services that he demonstrated and talked about during his talk, you are able to get all sorts of good stuff. And I believe we have a slide that demonstrates all of that right here.
So this is one of our simple little scripts. It's nothing special. It just goes out and actually queries the HLR resources, and it'll query tons of HLR resources to determine whether or not the resulting data actually matches or if there are anomalies or things of that nature. But the main point to pay attention to here is that we're just tracking my cell phone number on T-Mobile. And what's interesting here is that we're actually able to observe the MSC, MCC, and MNC. And for those that don't know, the MSC is the switching center. So generally, this number here kind of defines where you are physically, right? It's a high level. It doesn't necessarily say, hey, Don's on that street corner standing over there by the Starbucks, but it does tell me you're in Denver or Las Vegas or whatever. So there's definitely a lot of value to that number. But as we can see, it's just a number. There isn't necessarily any correlation to any specific resource that says, hey, this number is Las Vegas or this number is whatever, right? So we'll get into how we actually reverse engineer that later. The MCC, of course, is the country code, and that just defines, oh, you're in America, awesome. And then the other code, the MNC, is of course the network code, which defines within the country you're in, T-Mobile, AT&T, or whatever your specific provider is. And of course we need to know that. And
in some other countries, the MSC value actually has embedded in it, let's say, a zip code or an area code or something like that, and it kind of makes it easy for people to reverse engineer what the MSC value that is being returned and what geolocation it kind of corresponds to. In the United States, that's not necessarily the case. It doesn't always work that way, and whether that was by design or just because that's the way it worked out, we don't know, but some of the techniques that we're going to talk about is how we reverse from one of these random MSC numbers to an actual geolocation. And then, of course, we're going to take this HLR information, all of the data that it provides you. For instance, the MSC and the MNC, the MNC and the MCC Also tells you what provider a person has, even if they've ported your number. So that's always handy. And that's not something people really think about as a piece of information that should be privileged, but in fact it is. I shouldn't be able to tell that you had a T-Mobile number, you ported it to AT&T or vice versa, just from looking at you externally. And we'll get into that a little bit more and how that plays into some of these attack vectors.
So yeah, we really shouldn't care. We shouldn't care that there's a way to discern the actual physical location from the MSE. It shouldn't matter, because we don't know what the providers are going to do. We're looking at this from a completely black box point of view. So we can't make any guarantees. We can't make any guarantees about the behavior of the provider, the behavior of the network, except those that are defined by the standard. So all we can say is that, yeah, they're MSEs. They define some physical location. Awesome. So what does that really mean? Okay, well, it means that we can actually, number one, get a unique value, because this is a routing number that actually defines how messages are going to get to you within the system, right? So we have to figure out, all right, how can we extract this information without trying to infer information from the MSC specifically? So we'll get to that later.
Hey, can you tell that we kind of made these slides 30 minutes ago?
We're skilled in that fashion.
So funny thing about white pages. Is there a white pages for cell phone numbers? No. And it's a funny thing, in some countries there are, but in the United States there isn't. And it's public and it's not public. You can buy a caller ID database, right? I mean, there's a couple of different providers out there, like Targus, I believe, is one, and Verizon, AT&T, and a few of these other folks generate their own and keep their own, and maybe they submit some of that data to Targus, and Targus is just a company that just handles caller ID databases and things like that and sells it. You can get a contract with them to update it every month, every day, whatever. But one of the funny things is a lot of these GSM providers actually add entries for your individual account name and your cell phone number into the caller ID database. And while doing caller ID backspoofing and some of these other techniques is not new, many people fail to realize that that's actually the case. And so if you buy an AT&T number or you buy a T-Mobile number or any GSM number in the United States, your name and that cell phone number is going to end up in the caller ID database. And so by using some of these different techniques, you can basically just reverse engineer the entire caller ID database. You limit your scope of what you're crawling, and what you end up generating is white pages for private cell phone numbers and the name. So now we're putting a name to the cell phone number, which means, and people always talk about these at freaking conferences and things like that, where they'll find a bunch of celebrity phone numbers and make Brad Pitt call Jennifer Aniston and listen to the fallout. But regardless, it comes in very handy for adding context to some of this intelligence that we gather. So where before you had just numbers, now you've got a name. And then with a name, you can start to gather other intelligence from other sources.
Well said.
You have nothing else further to add to the slide?
Let's move to the next slide and we'll see.
Fine.
No, so essentially this is cheap, right? We're talking fractions of a cent. It's extremely easy to build your own database, which is why we have been going around saying you don't need to buy it, okay? Because the fact is you don't need the entire United States phone white pages all at once. It's probably not useful to you. You're probably not going to care. And
it'll come with a lot of junk as well.
Yeah,
there's going to be landlines. There's going to be a lot of just unavailable numbers.
And the biggest problem with that is that this information isn't updated as often as you think it is. And for the information that's updated fairly regularly, you've got to pay quite a bit of money. We're not interested in doing that. Like we mentioned earlier, we're cheap. We're cheap guys. We're average Joes. We want to get away with this as cheap as possible.
I've been on point for a year.
Yeah, So I mean, why pay for it? And the actual cost with the provider that we use per lookup is like 0.0024 cents, right? And so obviously that gets you pretty far. And we just do bulk lookups on regions that we care about, and then we just go from there. So we can make a lot of information, a lot of associations based on actual corporations, organizations, associations between relatives, organizations in other countries that have similar phone systems. So like if you're an international corporation and you have a presence in the United States, and you have a presence in Canada or Mexico or whatever, we'll have a technique to find those associations that you have with your coworkers and piece them together in a way that's useful to us.
Yeah, and a funny thing about what he was saying is when you start to gather the caller ID database, if you try to buy it from like Targus or something like that, like I said, you're going to spend a lot of money. There's going to be a record of it, and you're going to get lots of ridiculous stuff in there. And when you start to use like the back spoofing technique to just selectively update certain areas. So let's say you only want to update phone numbers that are in San Diego. Well, you can do that on a daily basis using these techniques, and you can start to combine that ability with some of these other intelligence techniques that we'll be presenting, and put it all together into some giant, scary intelligence gathering tool. And so, back spoofing is very easy and it's been very well known. So you just get a VoIP provider that has caller ID lookups enabled on an incoming DID and on an incoming phone number to, let's say, an asterisk box. And you just make a phone call outbound back to that number that you control, spoofing the caller ID outbound. So I make a call outbound spoofing Don's cell phone number here. It goes out, they do the lookup, and they send it back to me, and then I just log it.
And it's important to note the legality, right? So as many of you know, a little bill was passed, or is in the process of being passed.
Blackhat. Do we have to talk about the legality of these? Come on.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that this new legalese states that it's illegal to deceive or defraud, right? But you're actually implementing a call to yourself.
Hey, Don, is this my water or your water?
That would be, I don't know, we all have the same germs.
Yeah, we've been working together for a while.
Yours.
It's all good.
Anyway, so what's actually pretty cool is that the way this technique works is, it's back spoofing. It's going right back to your own system, right? So you're not defrauding anybody because there's no monetary transaction involved except for what you're already guaranteed to pay for. And second of all, you're not actually deceiving anybody because you're receiving the call. You know you placed the call. You know it's coming back to you. You just mark it down in your little record as debugging.
And remember, criminals don't care about legality. So the criminals and the bad guys, they're going to do this stuff anyway. We're just telling you this for your edification. Mm-hmm. And another thing about doing the back spoofing technique is that you can get in trouble with it. I mean, it's kind of a violation of the terms of service. For instance, if you abuse the lookup privilege. So certain VoIP providers actually don't charge you to do the caller ID lookup. They throw it in because maybe you're paying a flat fee or something like that, or a fat fee. And regardless, there are some providers that will charge you maybe, they'll have that cost and they'll pass some of it on to you. So it'll cost you, 0.08 cents. And if you start to do 10,000 lookups a day, short little bursts of calls that don't actually connect and don't make them money, they might say, hey, we're paying for all this and, we're going to cut you off. But the ones that actually charge you a little bit of money, they'll be less likely to do that because they're not footing the entire bill. So just something to keep in mind when you're doing that technique. And of course, like we said, the advantages and disadvantages of getting a service and buying a database versus just doing the back spoofing technique. Specifically is these websites like bulkzname.com, and there's other ones out there like that. They charge about $100 per 1,000 lookups. And of course, these caller ID databases that they have, they're not totally up to date. And so if you can get different VoIP providers that advertise, oh, I use the AT&T caller ID database, I use the Verizon caller ID database, et cetera, or we have our own, whatever, that's going to be higher quality and more up-to-date information that you'll be pulling versus if you go through some random website like this.
Yeah, so you don't have to do your math yourself. Essentially, what we're seeing as far as cost right now, 10,000 lookups is charging us about a little less than $30. So you can see the difference, right? Obviously, it's cost effective to do it with our technique. So.
And you get better data.
So, of course, the main idea here is to actually develop, as we said, your own white pages. But, what exactly is that really going to get you?
Celebrity phone numbers.
Celebrity
Who wants to call Megan Fox? Anybody? Megan Fox's
Nobody
phone
here?
number?
Come on, this is Blackhat and DEF CON, right? Yeah.
Come on, I know it's the last talk of the last day,
yeah,
but we're auctioning Megan Fox's cell phone number off. Anybody? Any takers? $5.
Oh.
That's pretty much what she charges anyway. Yes. Was that on tape? I'm talking to you, Megan.
Ooh.
TMZ, give me a call.
Yeah.
I'm dating Megan Fox now.
I don't know if I should just leave now or stay here. Okay, anyway, so the cool thing is that we can filter, right? I mean, if I know you work for a large corporation and I care about your corporation, I want to steal your data, and it's relevant to me to get all your phone numbers. I'm going to use this technique in the region that your company are, right? But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to filter. So this is the cool part, right? So usually what we do is we say, all right, I need a specific reason. I know your company is in Cupertino or San Diego or whatever, right? I'm going to use my old friend Nampa, right? And what I'm going to end up doing is just looking through the database saying, okay, what rate center corresponds with that specific location? And then I'm going to say, what NPA and XX actually correspond with that rate center. So, you know, for Denver, we've got 303, 947, and all kinds of different things. And you just actually say, all right, I'm going to start taking samples all over the place of these specific NPA and XX or exchange, right, area code exchanges. And you're going to look for places where you're seeing data, right? Because a lot of these are going to be unallocated. You're going to see bulk numbers that just haven't been allocated yet. Because even, you know, unlike IPv4,
it's almost like a dark net of phone
yeah,
numbers.
it's kind of weird. Like even though there are millions of people in the United States, somehow we have tons of unlisted, unused numbers, even though IPv4 is you know, dying severely. So it's kind of weird. But you know, it's cool because that makes it really easy for me, right? So if I just go out and pull these, you know, take samples of all these ranges, then I know specifically, oh, hey, your company is probably over here because I'm seeing tons of lookups resolving versus over here I see a bunch of unavailable, and that doesn't mean anything to me. So I figure out where you're most likely to be, and then I isolate my scan there, and then from there I can proceed accurately and get a really high percentage of probability that I'm going to hit your company. And we succeed pretty much 99% of the time.
Yeah, and another thing right here, the HLR records to determine the real provider, that's very important. We touched on that just a little bit ago. The main reason why we want to know what provider you have is because if I'm doing a scan in, let's say, Rhode Island, which has like 4 people in it, you know, as you're scanning it, you're going to find 3 entries for, you know, an individual. It'll be their landline, maybe the second landline, and their cell phone number. And they're probably all going to look exactly the same. So it may say J. Smith for 3 numbers. You don't know which one is which. So when you go to HLR, HLR will at least tell you, okay, this isn't a cell phone number, this isn't a cell phone number, but this is, and it's AT&T or T-Mobile or whatever. So that's when we're trying to do provider-specific attacks or cell phone-specific attacks, we don't want to be attacking landlines. That's dumb and wasteful. And if you're trying to do this on a mass scale, you just want to get all that stuff out of the way. You want to focus on you know, the devices that you want to actually attack, which are cell phones. So, or the individual behind that cell phone. So that's where the HLR stuff comes into play. It at least tells us that, yes, out of these 3 numbers, this one is the cell phone, and it's on this provider. And if you have specific attacks for that provider, then go ahead and use them. And that's high confidence information. So if you go look up in the NPAN database, you know, for the list of all of AT&T owned numbers, that isn't always updated. That's not always up to date. So it might say that, you know, this person's number is owned by AT&T. Well, they could have ported it to T-Mobile yesterday, and HLR will tell us that. So if we were going to try to launch an attack against somebody that was maybe specific to AT&T, it might fail. It might give up. It might fail in a bad way, in a noisy way that they might notice and make them suspicious. So at least now we say, okay, they're T-Mobile now. You know, we can start to target this.
And there's also another important thing to remember is that companies merge, right?
Yeah.
And anybody that has looked at this database before knows that it's filled with companies that no longer even exist, right? And a lot of those companies, you know, those numbers, those ranges are still associated with those particular companies, but larger companies like AT&T, T-Mobile, or whatever will buy those ranges of numbers and then allocate them to whatever purposes they have. So it's important to go out there and say, hey, you know, what region am I looking at? What mergers occurred in this region, or whatever. And that's, again, where HLR really comes into play here and is so important, because you, instead of looking for thousands and thousands of numbers, if you're looking for AT&T in a region where, hey, there is no AT&T in this database, you know they've bought ranges from someone else or have been allocated ranges from a dead company. You just don't know where. So you can take quick samples and find those HLR records that match with the provider you're looking for, and awesome, you're on your way.
Excuse me, I don't think AT&T acquires other companies ever.
That's just a rumor, I guess. So this is just a simple entry that I thought was funny. Haha.
Wang Chung?
This is just a little example of, you know, the kinds of things that we see.
Are you going to do the Wang Chung for us?
I may dance a little bit later, because I've got the shoes.
What happened to the Wang Institute entry?
Yeah, you know, we have a lot of interesting stuff. So we wanted to add the slides, but frankly, we have too many damn slides.
Do we have that slide where it shows all that stuff?
No, I'll just briefly explain it. So it's weird when you're actually looking through the CNAME database, right? Because you see all kinds of strange entries all over the place. And the most interesting one that we found is Shell Company.
Yeah.
Right?
It was like a couple numbers. Shell Company.
No, there's a block of 10 numbers. They're all cell phones, and it's Shell Company, one after another. Hilarious. And you can see...
Not shady at all.
Not shady. You can find embassies, the FBI, you can find all kinds of things. Things, people, and crazy stuff, things that you wouldn't want to say here. And if you want to, after the talk, feel free to come talk to me, and I will show you on my laptop.
Is that why we're not doing it?
Yeah, that's really kind of why.
So I'm independent, so I have nothing to lose right now. But I guess we'll not show that slide.
Yeah, if you want to see some funny things, just talk to me after the talk.
Yeah, but there was a really funny entry. It was called the Wang Institute, and I sent that screenshot to some of my friends, and I said you should probably call them for a consultation. I'm sure they'll help you out with your problem. And they were upset at me. So
we want to briefly cover what you actually see in the database, right? Because not everything is going to be a name. That's just a fact, okay? There's a huge number of numbers, and they all result in all kinds of crap. So the first two things that you see up there are crap, right? You've got wireless caller and unavailable. The first one is far less important and interesting than the second one, okay? The first one just means, oh, you ported to a company that actually has CNAME database entries, but because it's been ported and it's been ported for a company that didn't have caller ID database entries, you now suddenly end up with wireless caller. So very boring. It just means that more likely, you know, there's probably like an 80% chance that this has actually been a ported number from another provider. Unavailable.
Touching on that real quick.
Yeah.
So a lot of the CDMA providers, they don't put we notice CDMA providers don't put your name in the caller ID database. Only the GSM providers do, and that's just something that we've noticed. Maybe there is an exception. Maybe there are exceptions somewhere.
We should say the major providers.
The major providers, yeah.
Don't.
And so
we haven't analyzed all of the smaller ones.
And we've also noticed how sometimes we'll see if somebody from some GSM provider then ports the number to a CDMA provider that normally doesn't do that. Well, I've noticed actually, and I've showed this to you, that the caller ID entry actually remains. It's almost as if that provider that you ported to doesn't then go and add, you know, wireless caller or unavailable in that entry. They don't overwrite what the old entry was from that other provider that added the entry. Mm-hmm. So your name and that number stay even though you ported it to a CDMA provider. So just by looking at all these different use cases, you know, a person porting to CDMA or a person porting from CDMA, et cetera, you can start to uncover the behavior of these providers and how they interact with caller ID databases and who's sharing what databases, et cetera.
Yeah, it's really cool because you can actually begin to see trends, right? So, I mean, you see formats of names like first name, last name, or whatever, and you start to identify, oh, hey, this is so-and-so provider, that's so-and-so provider. And that's why the HLR is so important, because we can see that, oh, it's a ported number, blah, 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 they're ported to a CDMA or whatever, but they used to be on so-and-so. And eradicating those anomalies are really important.
And one of the things with the HLR providers is you don't get information for CDMA providers. So you're not going to get information on CDMA. This is all GSM targeted. Although there was one particular company where we found that a CDMA provider was giving us an MSC value in return. It was kind of odd because that wasn't supposed to happen. They didn't even advertise that they support these people. And so we decided to call technical support. So we called
This was a great call too. I wish we would have recorded it. It was
like
really...
4 a.m. When we were doing our first talk at Source Boston, and we are like, we shouldn't be seeing MSC values for a CDMA provider here. They don't support this, but there's a number coming back. So it has nothing to really do. This is a tangent, but we called them up, and they were like, "Oh, hello, sir. Who are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, my name's Mike." We're seeing something kind of odd. And he's like, "Oh, let me patch you to our network operations center in Serbia." I'm like, "Cool, you do that." And Sergey picked up, and he was more than happy to help us look at this problem and understand it. And I mean, they are great
companies.
companies.
He was great.
And these are like this is the best customer support I've ever seen.
Yeah, I've never had this kind of luck with any American services, unfortunately.
They didn't even ask me to like, "Hey, do you pay us for services?" It's like, "I'm Mike. Mike, your biggest customer? Come on." From America? Yeah, that Mike.
So the unavailable part is really cool, right? Because this tells me that either you're a burner, which is awesome to find burners, or it's an unallocated number. So burners are very fun, as I'm sure you can understand. And we'll get to the reason why it's really important to find these later. Of course, when you see unavailable, typically if you're searching through these numbers, you say unavailable means not allocated, boring. But with the help of HLR, you now know, oh, that's probably prepaid, and that's probably live, and that's really cool, as we'll discuss later.
Yeah, and speaking of prepaid phones, usually when you buy a prepaid phone, I walked into an AT&T store and they were like, "What's your name?" I said, "Nick D. Petrillo." So they wrote it down as like Mike D. Petrillo, and I was like, "Cool, all right." And in any case, the number they give me, if you go look it up in the caller ID database, it's some other random girl's number that had that number before me, and they just associate it. And they never update that entry for prepaid phones, but it's just kind of funny. Also, I liked having LOL at the end of my name. I thought that, like the guy actually wrote that down. I was like, "Are you serious? You really think that my name ends in LOL? Nick D. Patrol, lol. All right. That's cool."
So this is the summary, right? You've got HLR, you've got CNAME. Clearly, you can see how this is a very powerful tool, right?
Yeah, we're adding context to these numbers now.
Yeah.
a name to the number. And then, of course, with the internets and Google, you can start to put a face to the name, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and the great thing is that you can, well, I guess I shouldn't say great. The academically interesting thing is that you can target people. So if I think some guy's really cool, like Nick, and I just decide, hey, I wonder if Nick has other phone numbers that I don't know about.
Lots.
Then I can
They're not
find
for
out.
you.
Oh, well, they are now, baby.
So were you using this stuff to target people? You told me
No, absolutely not.
You told you told me this is not what we talked about.
Well, what?
I'm out of here.
We were going to pretend to get in a fight at the end of the conference over this, but apparently we're going to do it now. So this is kind of an example here, right? This is the map, okay? So what we're able to do, we just associate caller ID information with an actual MSC, and then we can say, hey, Nixon so-and-so, right? So I know he's generally in the main Providence area, right?
Nowhere.
Yeah, nowhere. So he's generally in this vicinity. And that's cool. That gives me a kind of an idea of where he's at. But as you can see, it's very high level, right? As we discussed earlier, it doesn't tell me what street corner he's on. It doesn't tell me what Starbucks he's on. But it's information that I shouldn't have, especially as a private individual, right?
Yeah, and this is something that Tobias would touch upon, and if you go look at his video and his documentation on all this, tracking cell phones is kind of scary. I mean, it's not like CSI Miami where it's like zoom and enhance, and where is this guy? Oh, he's behind me, which would be kind of awkward, I guess. But specifically, yes. Oh no, if I'm going to go CSI Miami, I'm going full out.
Sonny Crockett's coming back, guys. Watch out.
No, so to reiterate what Don said, as civilians anywhere in the world, you really shouldn't be able to tell you're in this country, never mind you're in this city, and never mind that you were in this city for this long, and never mind that you were in these cities for these longs, and I know when you came and went, and I know when you were in this country and how long you were there, and then you came back through this country you were there for, let's say, an hour, then you were off network because you were on a plane, and then you landed in the United States. through the eastern side, and then you drove to California. That's a lot of information. It's not GPS, latitude and longitude, but once you start to look at it in that sense, it can kind of be a little scary. So
yeah.
And thanks to all the unbelievable research that the CCC does and all those German GSM hackers do, all this original research is available to look at and explore and have fun like we have here.
Yeah, absolutely. Great foundation from those guys. So it's really important to figure out how we actually build these maps, right? Because as we said earlier, that number's opaque. That doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not going to associate it immediately with Providence or Denver or wherever. But I have techniques, right? Because we've talked about the HLR and we've talked about CNAME, and we can go out and amass all this information together to start building out a map of the United States, right? So now I can say, all right, let's start with known values. I want to map everything for AT&T. I want to map everything for the smaller providers, Viero, whatever, right? I start out with a name, okay? And then I just pick a location. I pick every place in the United States. Or I just say, hey, what's up with Michigan, right? And then I just go out and gather actual samples. So the samples are the big deal, right? And we talked about samples earlier. We just pull NPA and XX, and then based on actual time, we can figure out where people are. And time is important because, of course, what's our normal day like, right? We get up in the morning, hang out at the house for a little bit, and we go to work.
Unless you've been fun employed like me, you get up in the morning, you watch your girlfriend go off to work, you go back to sleep, maybe eat some Cheez-Its out of the box, call your girlfriend, your other girlfriend, Megan Fox, a little bit.
Before this gets too depressing, let's move on.
Then you watch your girlfriend come home from work. She makes you dinner.
So you can see the problems that are associated with this, right? It's pretty clear that we all live on a routine, right? We go to work, we come home, we sleep. We tend to be stagnant individuals. There are always going to be the go-go people that have their 9 to 5 and then go nuts and go do 20 things after hours. And that's cool. But they're probably still working. And they probably still sit in the same place for 8 hours a day. And what's interesting is we can map that information, right? So if I pick a location, okay, and I say, I live in Denver, so we'll just pick Denver. And I say, okay, let's check out all the NPA and XX for Denver specifically, right? And then we go and filter them through HLR like we discussed earlier, right? So we know that all these providers own these specific numbers. And then I pull the HLR several times during the day when I'm most likely guaranteeing that you're going to be sleeping, working, or chilling at home with your family, right? And I'm taking samples throughout those time periods throughout the day. Maybe I do it for a day, maybe I do it for a week. Depends on how much I care and how lazy I am.
The more samples you get, like the more days you do something like this, let's say you pull let's say you pull the location at like 2:30 a.m., 3:30 p.m. when you think you should be at work, and then when you think you should be at work, then like 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. when you should be home again. You can just you do this for a week, and then you can see, okay, these 10,000 people, they do that. Maybe they're at home in this area, then they drive an hour to this area, then they're back in that same original area this time, and there's going to be anomalies, and you're going to have to throw a lot of this stuff out. But
yeah,
generally speaking,
you'll
what
see a little
emerges,
bit about that.
Yeah.
What's really cool is that you can actually start to realize that this information is a lot less variant than you'd think it would be, right? Because we always think that everybody's traveling all the time, doing crazy stuff, but we're really not as a society. And that's very evident in these samples. We just go out and pull this information, and really, I've been able to consistently prove that the exact same samples guarantee this MSC is associated with this city, right? If I sample an afternoon versus sampling a week or a month, we've almost been able to, with large enough set of samples, guarantee that it's going to be that accurate. And that's kind of an interesting thing, right? Because you have to look at that information as something that isn't such a huge window into our daily lives. But it is. And that window gives us, as attackers, a lot of opportunity to do much nastier things than we'd think. And that's kind of what our intent is here, is just to get people thinking about our actions and the information that's out there and how this information can really define our points of vulnerability in our threat surface as a whole.
And one thing too about the granularity of these MSE values is, if you're in a big city like Denver, you might have 2 MSE values that cover the eastern and western side of Denver. If you're in Rhode Island, you might have one MSE that just covers the entire state. So you got to remember that if you got to take all of that into consideration when you're trying to track somebody or you're taking samples like he was just saying. You got to remember that population density determines how many towers are going to be in a particular area. Do they need to add another mobile switching center to handle load? Who knows, right? So a lot of that stuff comes into play.
And we'll talk about enhancements later where we actually can try to infer information based on your traveling patterns, based on the MSCs that we see over time, and try to gather more information that allows me a window into where you are, what you're doing, and all that other stuff. But let's just take a simple example, right? Let's map T-Mobile inside Denver, okay? So what are the requirements? We just discussed this, right? Phone numbers owned by T-Mobile. This is easy, right?
We already
easy
talked
stuff.
about this.
NPA, NXX, HLR, filtering out all the providers. Very simple. We take samples over time. The results, very accurate. Very, very accurate. So we can go ahead and skip and see, all right, here's NPA and XX again. Let's skip this crap. So here's actually what we want to see, okay? So this is an example of actual NPA XX dumps. So I just want to give you guys a good example of, if you haven't seen it before, this is what the actual database looks like. So you can actually just easily pull
Is this
T-Mobile.
a laser pointer? Oh my God. Do you want a laser pointer?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to burn my eyes. So it's really straightforward, really easy to see. A lot of people have been familiar with this before, right? But it's important for those that don't understand, aren't familiar with this, to know that this is how simple it is, right? It's really laid out this easily. And it's laid out like this for a reason, because providers need to have blocks of numbers because they need to have those numbers to allocate them to their subscribers. Very simple, very elegant. And you can even sometimes have the actual signing date. And the signing date will actually tell you, oh, hey, T-Mobile got this in 2009 or 2001 or whatever.
And then the signing date might be a time when it was ported over or whatever.
Exactly. That's the point that I was getting to, is that
in fact,
sometimes that can give you a clue. If you're looking through for a specific provider and you see that provider was actually allocated this number before that provider existed, oh, hey, that's probably ported. Maybe it's not relevant to me. Maybe it is. Depends. So anyway, you just have a good idea of how that works. So the samples, you just verify that it's an actual T-Mobile provider, and you're golden. Let's go ahead and skip. So this is the result, right? That same slide that we saw before, where we actually see, oh, hey, there's this phone number resulting in MSC. But now we actually know what it means, right? We can concisely say, I know when I see MSC 206-313, this is associated specifically with Denver. So we wanted to talk about number portability a little bit. We got a little ahead of ourselves. We tend to do that because we talk a lot, Nick and I. So we'll go ahead and skip this as well. But this is the result, okay, of the actual queries. So we have dumps from our SQL, right, where we just say, all right, over a period of time, and again, here, this is one of my smaller samples where I was actually able to prove that, okay, we don't need to take samples for a month anymore because an afternoon or an entire day will work, right? And the samples are small, okay? You can look at this and see that I only have 33 count of 8054, right? But it correlates with the numbers that we had pulled long term. So we were able to verify that, yeah, consistently, we're able to pull the same information in a short period of time. So that gives you an idea of, from an attacker's point of view.
I don't know how to use a computer, sorry.
If you need to map the country very quickly, it's not going to take you months. It's not going to take you weeks. It's going to take you days. Okay? So if the providers switch this all up, suddenly you're golden, because your software and your skills tell you that it's only going to take a few days to remap the entire United States, and you can still track people.
So, anybody else tired? Yeah? All right. So you know how I feel a little bit.
No, we need to ask the truth, though. Tired? Who's drunk? Yeah, let's get some names. Yeah?
Yeah?
Okay.
All right. Fair enough.
So we can really do the same exact thing, right, but for CNAME. Okay? So this is where it actually gets fun. So we're looking for a specific fish, and it doesn't have to be an organization. It can be a person, right? But we use the same technique. We're not going to go through all those slides again because it's ridiculous. It's the same process. You guys know this by now. It's easy. NPA and XX. Look for the providers. Verify them through HLR. Ensure that the MCC and MNCs are actually what you're supposed to be looking for. Take samples. Ensure those samples are actually valid samples. And then you're done, right? You've got tons and tons of names. We can do this all day. We can back spoof all day. What's really cool, though, is that we can come up with very interesting results. So in a short period of time, we've actually been able to say, hey, let's go check out Cupertino. So as we know, a lot of executives live in Cupertino. And here are their phone numbers. Actually, you won't see the phone numbers, but here they are, essentially. This is our HLR database. We're obviously not going to give you a phone number because we're not jerks. Well, I'm not. But
I am.
That's why he's fun employed, people. So the second entry is Apple Incorporated, right? 46 entries. These are all actual cell phones that belong to management.
And we know they're cell phones, so we know they're not office numbers. We know they're not just the satellite office to Apple. We know they're cell phone numbers, and they belong to the. And what can we infer from the fact that we know these are cell phone numbers and the caller ID says Apple Computer or Apple Incorporated? It means that the company bought them that number. So we know that now that this is a company-provided cell phone number. This is company property. This isn't a personal number. Now look at this last entry. Kristen A. from Apple. If you did other intelligence gathering, and let's say you were able to identify her in reality, maybe she lived in another city, maybe she commutes to work, you could go dump the for cell phone numbers in that city and maybe find a Kristen A. in that city, and then maybe you can say, well, I'll assume that that's the same person, right? Now that's her personal number, and maybe her landline number, and this is her company number, and now you're starting to build a profile, starting to invade privacy here, and you start to just gather all this information about somebody. And
well, I got to be honest with you. I got really excited when I saw the first entry on there.
That's an old school.
You know why? Old school. So Apple Computer, when they used to allocate phones for their executives back in the day, this is what they ended up with. So I thought I caught a big fish, right? I'm calling the phone number. I'm like, oh man, Steve Jobs, awesome. And the guy picks up the phone and I'm like, Steve? He's like, what? I'm like, oh man, awful. That sucks. I'm like, oh, well, my name's Don. I thought this was Steve's phone number. And, I don't say Steve Jobs, but I'm like, hey, how's it going? So what are you up to? He's like, and he's just kind of like completely stunned, and I can hear kids in the background. It sounds like there's a grill going on or something. And he's like, this is Kevin. I'm like, oh, looking up, is there an executive named Kevin?
Now you don't have to just do this against companies and stuff. For instance, I was on a trip to Disney World, and I was in Epcot Center, and there's a bunch of payphone booths in the England area, and they looked like the Doctor Who booth. And there's real payphones inside of them, and they had numbers on them. And I did a caller ID lookup on that one, and it actually said like Disney Co. or whatever like that. It was just random. I'm sitting there, and I was like, wow, imagine if you were going through and you just start war dialing whatever, and imagine if you found these phone booths and you just started calling them. And what's funny about these phone booths, and I know I'm getting on a little tangent, but it's a good story. So people love to take photos in these phone booths, right? I mean, they're the Doctor Who phone booth in England. And you got people from Georgia going to Disney World who have never seen an English phone booth and are like, hey, this is neat. I want my picture taken in it. I watch Doctor Who. And so I sit off in the corner with my girlfriend who's upset at me right now because she knows what I'm doing. And people they'll all get, their phone booths are right in a row, they'll all get in the phone booths and they'll be hanging out. And I'll use stupid asterisk tricks to make them all ring at the same time. And they'll be like, they'll be standing there, they'll be like, hello? And I'm, it's like, hey, how's it going? You enjoying your Disney vacation? This is Matthew from customer service. How's it going? And they're like, good, I guess. I'm like, if you yell out cock-a-doodle-doo at the top of your lungs, I'll give you $1,000 right now. And, I'm 2 feet away. And somebody starts yelling at the top of their lungs. And I'm like, you know what? I changed my mind. Hang up. True story. My girlfriend hates me for it because she at this point when I first started introducing myself as like Matt from customer service, she literally did one of these like, she goes over to Paris waiting for me to finish up my shenanigans. Anyway, stupid.
So as you can see, very easy to find Nemo.
Or
we can tie it
prank
all
call
together,
people
right?
at Disney World.
Yeah.
I'm fun employed for a reason, guys.
So this is very, very concise, right? We've got clear locations now. We know exactly where the city is that you are in, or at least the greater area, right? And we know who you are. So this results in a lot of opportunities for just profile building, right? Now I can start mapping everywhere you go, various times throughout the day. I know when you're at work. I know when you're at home, because they're completely different MSCs.
Dude, you are creepy. You're creeping me out. I don't like it.
Oh, come on. Don't pick on the short guy.
Fine.
But you guys get what this is all about, right? This is simple stuff to understand. What it comes down to is I have information that I shouldn't have. And I'm wasting your time without you even knowing it, right? Because the fact is, this is simple, right? The coolest part about this, I don't need SS7. I don't have to waste any time doing like crazy, insane hacker tricks, right? I love Carsten Knoll. He's brilliant. But the fact is, all this stuff requires very little intelligence. If I can figure it out, then so can you guys, right? That's what it comes down to. That's what it comes down to, really. So this is really interesting stuff. It's fun stuff, but it's easy. And that's the problem, because we have this huge hole where now any of us can go out there and start amassing all this data, amassing all this information, gather privacy data on all of us, you know. Oh man, all 50 of my friends are at Blackhat. I proved it online, and they're all standing right next to you, like, oh, okay, that's cool. You just wasted a bunch of money, but whatever. But this is what it's about. You got to just make sure that the information that's out there is information that's actually contained in a relevant way.
It's not GSM baseband fuzzing. It's not ridiculously owning the crypto like the talk that was right before us by Karsten. But it's still pretty neat stuff, and I hope you guys are enjoying it.
It's fun, and that's what it's all about, right?
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you.
Excellent.
It really does.
Mostly just because of your hairstyle. That's cool. I can't pull that off. So here's where it gets interesting, right? Because before we just had this opaque, random place, right? Where I know that, okay, you're in the middle of Denver somewhere. Yeah, that's great. I don't know where the hell you are. But now we can actually define bounding boxes, which allows me some granularity for the location data, right? So now I know if you're traveling from one MSC that's adjacent to another, okay, this is cool because I can say, all right, I now can kind of plot what the MSC looks like. I can plot what the adjacent MSC looks like, and the MSCs around them. And if you're traveling, and I know you're traveling, I can actually predict where you're going to be. Now we have a little bit of location granularity. I can say, all right, in Denver we've got Interstate I-70, okay? I-70 travels east and west, almost straight through the middle of Denver. What's great about that is it's obviously traveling through multiple MSCs. So if I want to, during the day when people are traveling to and from work, they're using I-25 or I-70, I can watch them traveling down I-75 or I-70 and say, oh, they're in Aurora. Oh, they're in Denver. Oh, they're in Golden. Hey, watch that. That's really cool. I can actually see somebody traveling home to their house, And that's really cool stuff, because when you start plotting this out and you put it on a map, you're using KML from Google, you're integrating it into these, maps online, and you're saying, now I know Nick is driving. I know he's driving on this particular road because he's going at this speed, this is how he's traversing MSCs, and I can guarantee that I can predict exactly where he's going to be in the next 30 minutes. And that's a hell of a lot scarier than one big opaque blob in the center of the map where I don't know anything about what you are, where you are, or anything of that nature.
And the further away we get from the data we collect, obviously the lower the confidence of the information. I mean, we might not be totally accurate. We might not be always 100% accurate on these inferences, but we can get really close. And again, as civilians, if we can get really close and this level of data, this importance of data that's personal to you, that's good enough. It's one of those things where even if you're only 70% accurate, it's still pretty dangerous. You still shouldn't be able to do something like this. And this is a really good example of how we're bringing together all of these different things that we've been talking about to kind of culminate into this next slide, which I already went to.
So here's actually where it gets funny. Okay, this is hilarious actually to me. Okay, so CNAME. It's got names of individuals in there, right? So white pages is really, really nice, okay?
They are
The
awesome.
normal white pages, right? Your regular landline white pages. What's great about this is these guys actually decided to put this all online for you for free. So how nice is that for us? because not only do I know what house a particular individual now lives in, but they were kind enough to go out and take the trouble of plotting geolocation for every house that they actually have an address for. So instead of me plotting out on my map, oh, here's 415 Brook Street or whatever, and then meh, on my Google map, now I actually have geolocation, so I can build KML files based on this data. So what's really
hey,
cool...
look at that. Information leakage. What is that?
Whoa.
What was that email? Awesome. I love spam. That's nice. Hey, probably should pull this out before I started my talk.
I just kind of assumed it was like TMZ or something. I heard about Megan Fox.
Yeah, they're already on it. I'm already getting interview
Blackhat's that hot. So this is great stuff, right? Because I can take the names that I get from CNAME, right? Extract them, first name, last name. I plug it into white pages. Hey, for Denver, in Colorado, with this last name, first name, what results do I get? And you actually get pretty good results. And what's really cool is you can start building bounding boxes with those results. As I said, we're getting geolocation data, right? We're getting latitude and longitude with a lot of these records back. So if I know that you are living in an area of a specific MSC, now I can say, all right, this geolocation in the MSC, this geolocation in the MSC, this one outside, okay? And you start to plot it, and you can figure out, oh, excellent. Now I have an actual map of what this MSC looks like. I can see where it climbs north to, south to, whatever. And this is a little breakdown of how this works, because unfortunately CNAME is very messy, right? You have a lot of variance, especially from provider to provider, as to how these entries are put in. So it's kind of a little bit, it's a little bit mungy. You gotta hack up your script and make sure that it can process all this crap. So pretty much what it breaks down to is a couple different use cases. You've got last name, comma, first name, last name, first name, last name, all squished together, and sometimes the first name gets cut off, but you have to kind of just accommodate for that. So okay, if you don't get results with one, you try results with dropping off the first couple of characters until you hit something that looks like a last name, and you just keep plugging it away. But the result, that's your result, okay? This is an actual bounding box of the actual MSC that we've been talking about, 8054, in Denver. No, it's not perfect.
It won't be perfect.
No.
It's impossible to make it perfect. But specifically, what we've been able to do here is we just need that reference point. We need to know where you are, when you are, so when we pull the HLR, we know that it's going to be accurate. So if I have a Denver number, again, just to reiterate, if we have a Denver number, we want to look it up. We want to make sure they're in Denver. We want to make sure they're at home. We want to make sure they are where we pulled via white pages the latitude and longitude of that address. So at 2:30 a.m., they should be at home sleeping. We know exactly where you are, so we can specifically map that at that time. That data is accurate. We know where it was. And eventually, you build this bounding box, which is the coverage area of that particular MSC.
And what's excellent is you can actually start to see the information that you couldn't infer before. Right? Like, I had no idea that this MSC extended all the way to the airport, but it does, right? That's interesting. I didn't know that it extends all the way to Aurora and actually absorbs the western half of Aurora, but it does.
Now imagine other bounding boxes of different colors surrounding this one and bordering it, maybe probably overlapping it in some cases, and you just you can build this little patchwork of the coverage areas.
Yeah, and it begins to look just like puzzle pieces. Puzzle pieces that don't fit, but it's close enough. And close enough is good enough, right?
It's close enough for two losers on stage at Blackhat. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's good enough for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures.
Yeah, that's the second reference.
Yes.
We're one over what I promised everyone.
Yeah, so we went above our budget. That's pretty cool. So you can see the results here, right? This enhances the heck out of IMSI catching, right? And we'll explain a little bit more about that later. But location approximation is really what it's all about, right? Figuring out the bounding box, figuring out where you're traversing from one bounding box to another. That's gold. That's absolute gold. If you're driving home, now I know where exactly you are. So the other cool thing is cell towers, right? Because of course with IMSI catching, cell towers are your worst enemy. And it's always very good to figure out exactly where they are. And we'll get into that a little bit more. And actually...
Do we want to talk about that now real quick?
Nah, well, how are we on time, guys?
15 or 10, whatever.
We got 13 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't we just go ahead and...
Yeah, we'll cover the traffic.
Yeah. So here's the cool thing about Denver as well, and I've been really banging on Denver, but that's because Denver has cool stuff.
Be quick.
So here's the interesting thing right here. We've got a new website called cotrip.org. What this has, streaming video all over the state of actual traffic. So now it's not just simple traffic cameras that take snapshots every 10 minutes and then post that information. Now it's actual streaming video where I can see cars traveling by. And what's great is that they are kind enough to let you link to these directly, access these images directly. They're, putting all this information out for iPhone applications, all kinds of stuff. So they don't care if the information is out there. It's supposed to be out there. They want it out there. They're using it as a resource. They're doing, data mining with it to figure out traffic patterns. That's cool for them, better for us. Because now I have visualization, right? Now not only do I have bounding boxes, if I see you traveling from one bounding box to another, one MSC to another, at a specific rate, I know that you're probably on an interstate or on some other road or whatever. If I have a map, I can now approximate where you are within that map. And then I can watch you on cameras and try to figure out, oh, there's the same vehicle over and over and over. Okay, so now I know what you drive, right? Or I have a good idea because there are probably a handful of them all squished together on the interstate, right? But
it's easy to track me because you'll just see my Ferrari going by on the camera. That's right, Megan. I got a Ferrari. Do you like Ferraris? I do.
So that's a definite enhancement, right? And of course, I'll kind of skip over this because it's really information, but it's academic, right? I mean, the problem is that you still have to actually analyze the information, analyze the video. But we're kind of working on that. It's just not pristine. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit about IMSI catching instead.
Yeah, so there's different resources for getting latitude and longitude of existing cell towers. I mean, there's the Open Cell ID project. Google actually has a pretty complete listing of cell towers and their locations and the cell ID and the LAI and all that good stuff. And you can actually query it through Google and just get all that information. And why is that important? Because you can then basically overlay those towers, and specifically you can figure out what provider those towers belong to. So I say, okay, I've got the latitude and longitude for the tower, so I know the latitude, I know the actual coordinates of the bounding box of my MSC, and I want to ask Google or OpenCellID or some other way of getting that information what towers fall within that boundary and where. So we just plot those in that graphic, in that bounding box, so we know where they exist in that coverage area. And there's different ways of validating this. So for instance, the theoretical maximum distance of a GSM tower should be 23 miles on a flat terrain. And if you have one tower in the middle of that giant MSC in Denver, that's probably not accurate. If you have a bunch and it accurately covers it, okay, well, I think that's high confidence. So it just allows an attacker to approximate which cell tower signal they'll be competing against. So if you know that a person is in Denver, you go to Denver, you got your IMSI catcher with you, you do other intelligence gathering on this person, you know that they're going to be at this particular cafe through some other, again, through some other source, and you go there, you will be able to look up in relation to that location what other cell towers are around you, how far away they are. You'll be able to maybe also take all of these other things, the CNAME, the HLR. You'll know that they use AT&T as a provider, so you can pre-configure IMSI catcher to be AT&T, because maybe you didn't know that. Maybe they were T-Mobile. Maybe they switched from T-Mobile to AT&T overnight. You'll be able to determine that, and that just helps you along when you're trying to use IMSI catching technologies. And it'll also just tell you, is that cafe sitting underneath the cell phone tower? Is it on the fringe of a cell phone tower? So that just gives you a little bit more intelligence about your RF environment, about your cell phone environment when you're trying to launch an attack. And these things aren't even necessary. People do IMSI catching all day long without this information, but it helps. So any information you can get is useful information.
This is all about enhancing your attack, right?
Yeah.
And as much information as you can possibly gather to make your attack as pristine as you can. That's what it's all about. And there are three, in my opinion, there are three main keys to IMSI catching, which is number one, knowing the provider, number two, knowing the IMSI you're actually targeting, and then the actual phone number for that individual that you're trying to target.
And
so
everybody go to Chris Padgett's talk, DEF CON, because he'll be demonstrating an IMSI catcher there live, and I'm sure everybody's heard about that.
Hopefully if he's not shut down, but cross our fingers, he will still be doing his talk.
And also, what Don was saying about getting IMSIs, in the United States, via the HLR records that we can get, you don't get the IMSI of the person's phone number, but in the rest of the world, you can. So also, if you're launching IMSI catching attacks against somebody that's outside the United States, knowing their IMSI ahead of time helps. So that's some of the information you can get, but we really don't touch on this because this is kind of USA-centric.
Oh, and very quickly, though, because we forgot to add a slide here, there is a provider that's out there claiming to sell the ability to reverse a phone number into an IMSI, right? For pretty much everybody.
No, from an IMSI to number.
Or I'm sorry, from an IMSI to a number. So that's very important for an attacker. And they're selling that for apparently a large upfront cost, which is why we haven't been able to do it, but for a fraction of a cent afterwards. So
now we know who you are, where you are, what your behavioral patterns are, what you're most vulnerable, etc. And we're going to have to go through this quickly.
I'll let you take it.
Okay, I'll take it. So changing someone's voicemail announcement to Rick Astley, yay, that's old. Very old. So you wrote this slide. What is this? What am I looking at?
I don't even know what it is. Why are we doing this? So,
screw it. We've got 10 minutes. Whoa. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. My beard might have gotten caught in the microphone.
Well, the point of these slides is pretty much that information.
Oh, here's voicemail crawling. Oh, I'll cover this real quick.
Yeah, okay. He's actually better at this anyway.
So
this is his specialty.
Using HLR or caller ID information, and who knows about the voicemail break-in with caller ID spoofing? Everybody knows about that. Well, one of the funny things about it is when you spoof caller ID and you call somebody's phone number, it's going to ring 8 times or whatever, or they have to hit ignore, and it's going to ring maybe. It's going to be noisy, right? And then maybe you'll get into their voicemail box and yay. So who knows what slide dial is? It's this free service online. You just call it. You enter in your friend's cell phone number. It kicks you directly into their voicemail without ringing their number. It might say, it might ring it half a ring or a little half vibrate, or it might just come up with missed call. But the technique they use to do this, nobody really knows, but one of the techniques is you can just create what's called a ring hunt group in asterisk, which will basically call your cell phone number, your car phone, who has a car phone still, and your office number, and your home number. It'll ring them all at once, and then the first person to pick up, everybody else gets dropped, right? It's just trying to find you. So what you do is you do a ring hunt group to the same number. So it makes 2 simultaneous phone calls to your cell phone number, and one of those is going to get kicked directly to voicemail, right? Everybody's had that experience. And the one that doesn't get picked up, which is the voice call, which was trying to ring the phone number, gets dropped immediately. So the providers pick up the voicemail quick enough that nobody gets rung. Your phone won't ring. So just add caller ID spoofing to this, and now you get kicked directly into their voicemail with the caller ID spoofing without ringing their number. So if you do this at 2:30 a.m., it won't ring 8 times and wake them up, and they won't know until the next day when the damage is done. And with HLR, you can determine what provider the person has. So you know that these 2 providers are usually vulnerable to voicemail break-in, but these 2 aren't. So instead of attempting to do this attack on these 2 providers that aren't vulnerable and maybe failing and maybe giving it away or saying, hey, I shouldn't be getting a call from my voicemail. That's odd. I won't pick that up. You don't
just to jump in real quick, I apologize to interrupt, but just very quickly, one of the important things to note is that for some of the providers that actually will block caller ID spoofing and dumping into voicemail, they will ring regardless if you try this slide dial attack. So it's actually very important that you can determine what provider they are using. So, real quick, so once you're in somebody's voicemail, you can start to dump the voicemails that are there, obviously, and you can dump the envelope information about that voicemail. So you can get the phone number of the person who left it. Well, then you repeat this attack again. So everything we just described on that person who left you that voicemail, and you say, oh, can I break into their voicemail too? Yeah, I can, okay. Well, you do this to everybody who left you a voicemail, and you do it to everybody who left them a voicemail, et cetera, using HLR to make sure that you're doing it against vulnerable people, and maximizing your success while minimizing your exposure. And what you end up is you end up crawling people's voicemails, getting the context of their voicemail, building social networks, because previously this attack, you just had phone numbers. Now we've got a name. Now we've got locations. So we're just adding lots and lots of context to this attack, and we're enhancing all of these original attacks, making them bigger and better and scarier. The best part is you can actually determine whether people are coworkers, whether people are related,
right,
whether people are married. It's very interesting information. So even if you don't actually listen to the voicemails, or if you listen to them and they seem completely benign, you can still make those associations. You know that particular MSCs correspond with work because they tend to be there during the day, but they tend to be in a different location at night. So those individuals that are in the same location at night, they are probably either related, living in the same area, and have a more friendship-oriented relationship. But over time, you can ascertain what these particular relationships are, and that's what this is all about. The social information is key here.
And so we skipped a bunch of stuff, but it was mostly just VoIP tricks that are enhanced by some of these techniques. And we really wanted to focus on the techniques more so than these other stupid tricks. So since we're running out of time, I really did want to cover mitigations and defenses. And there's lots of stuff here. We didn't fit it all into some slides, but switch to a more secure provider. CDMA is just security through obscurity at this point because if Karsten and all of his friends moved to America and started putting their attention on CDMA, it would fall in like 3 weeks. So since CDMA pretty much exists nowhere but America and like Korea.
But if I can interject, there's actually one very important point that we have to note. This is not the provider's fault.
No.
Okay. So a lot of this information, a lot of these attacks, actually pretty much everything here is based on the design of GSM and the global phone network. It's a vulnerability in design. It's not a vulnerability in AT&T, T-Mobile's network, whatever. They have to adhere to the specification. It's a requirement just to function, to interact in a peer-to-peer environment where they have to route calls from one provider to another. That is what they're designed to do. And these holes that we've found are holes in the design. So it's not like we can go to AT&T, and we actually did reach out to both AT&T and T-Mobile and say, hey, we see these problems. What exactly is going on? Is there anything that you guys can do to mitigate this? And they are actually attempting to work on solutions. And I will say that they have both been very candid about working very diligently towards solutions to these problems. But again, these aren't things that they can remediate easily, right? These are designs in the global infrastructure, and they're problems that can't be easily circumvented without a lot of re-engineering.
So we've got 1 minute left. So obviously, subscribe mitigations. Who has a voicemail pin? Who doesn't? Anybody really don't have a voicemail pin? Yeah, you're lying. I know a bunch of people do. Set a voicemail pin. And also, you can ask your provider about caller ID information. You can have them remove it or change it or do whatever, maybe, if you're lucky and you get the person who actually likes their job at the end of the phone. Some of the other provider things that providers can do, we can stop, in the United States, you can stop putting the IMSI encoded into the ICC ID on the outside of the SIM card and stop using values like that as authentication values. Probably shouldn't be doing that. The IMSI is supposed to be private. Shouldn't be, the unique part of it should not be encoded into the ICC ID and then be used in other places. So if everybody remembers the AT&T iPad fiasco, that's why that was more important than it should have been. But that only applies to the United States. The rest of the world doesn't do that practice, and that wasn't very widely known. But that is a public fact. And also, thankfully, AT&T allowed people to get replacement SIM cards. So if you actually were affected by that, you can go ahead and do that. Also, for business users, again, ask about caller ID information, things like that. Offer opt-in and opt-out of caller ID for business users, if you're a provider. Also, enforce voicemail PIN setting, like Verizon does this. You can't use your voicemail unless you set a nice PIN. Tighter restrictions on SS7, which Don was talking about earlier, and logging, correlating events, suspicious activities, things like that. Probably a good idea. And it's very hard to mitigate against all of these attacks. It really is, because if you do that, you might break some stuff. You got to remember that you're a customer service-oriented industry, and you have to make sure that you're very compatible across the board. And of course, there's some detection methods. Vigilance and common sense. Who here has vigilance and common sense? Everyone. So Nathan's shaking his head. Well, you're still in college, so it'll eventually come to you. Eventually. Maybe your lack of common sense was going to college. Have you thought about that? No, kidding.
Dude, you should play the audio.
Oh, okay. You know what? It's the last day. It's the last talk. We're out of time, but I got something.
We want to leave you with something at least a little bit funny.
But I don't think, is there an audio hookup for this? Maybe not.
Just play it with the mic.
Oh, yeah, okay. Hold on.
So talking about voicemail pins and caller ID spoofing and dropping people into actual caller ID scenarios where they're getting a call from somebody that they don't know, and they pick up the phone, and it sounds really weird.
Yeah, so I'll explain this after I play it. Hopefully you guys can hear it. If not, I'll just explain it.
You will
Please
lulz.
enter your password, then press pound.
Hello?
Please enter your password, then press pound. Thank you for using T-Mobile voicemail. Goodbye.
Yeah. So can somebody actually in the audience tell me exactly what just happened there? Anybody? So some guy got a phone call from his voicemail, picked up, his voicemail said, please enter your password. So he entered it, and of course, if you are the person on the other end of this, and you've used all these tools to target this person, you're in the middle of an intelligence gathering operation against them, you decode the DTMF tones that they just entered, and you can tell that it was a 4-digit PIN because they entered, 4 digits and then a pause and then the pound sign. And then T-Mobile said goodbye. And they probably went, oh, okay, well, that's cool. I guess I'll... That's a totally expected thing that should happen. Yeah. And so because I have nothing to lose, I played that. And that had nothing to do with ISEC partners or Don Bailey. So.
Oh, and keep in mind, the person that was called was a security researcher.
Yes. Let's see Robin Sage do that. Am I right? Let's see Robin Sage pull off. I think that's one of the coolest social engineering tricks I've ever done personally, and it's just so stupid. That's so simple that's what makes it so cool. So.
That's the best part about this entire talk. It's all dumb pet tricks. Yeah. That's all we're doing.
Can you believe this stuff still works? Anyway, you're all still here, so I'm going to go through these real quick. So again, pro tip in the security industry, if you get a phone call from your voicemail, don't pick it up. If it asks you for a password, don't give it out. Just because it's a sexy voice on the other end of the line, and it's from a machine. She's still a machine, remember. She doesn't want to know your PIN number.
That doesn't make her not sexy, though.
That's personal preference.
T-Mobile girl who does the voiceovers. I'm available. Call me.
I guess Megan Fox is out of luck, man.
She can come too, I guess. She's cool with it. We have an open relationship, Megan and I. Just to announce that to the ladies in the room. All 3 of you. I'm not counting the long-haired man in back there. Anyway, defense continued. If you receive a flood of SMS messages and strange MMSs from random numbers, and you never did that, you never saw that before, might be something bad. Look into it. If you keep getting missed calls from random numbers and they never ring, it might be your friend trying to slide dial you. It might be somebody trying to do something else using that technique. Look into it. Also, remember, you always have the option to change your phone number. I mean, of course, if they'll try to find you again in the caller ID database, but you can always do that. It takes 2 seconds. The VoIP providers should probably monitor and restrict caller ID spoofing capabilities. Now, of course, it's required for a lot of business users because, if you have a small business and you have 30 phones and you get one incoming number and one outgoing number, you'll want to do caller ID spoofing so it looks like everybody has their own number or extension or whatever. I mean, there's business cases for this, but maybe they should try to vet who they're allowing to do caller ID spoofing. It's always going to be a possibility. You can never put a stop to it, but I figured I'd throw it in there because I wanted to do my due diligence.
Unemployment.
Yeah. And then, of course, that's to enterprises and corporations. All of the things we just talked about were mostly against individuals. Now apply this to a CEO. Apply this to a group of people at an important corporation. This can be used as an intelligence gathering tool for competitors. This can be used for corporate espionage. This can be used for whatever you want to use it for. So corporations and the enterprise, they need to take all of the stuff that we just talked about and include it into their threat matrix, into their policies. So maybe CEOs get smartphone restricted, enterprise restricted smartphones, and maybe the regular employees just get regular phones. Who knows? So the guy in the mailroom probably just can use his personal phone, or actually the guy in the mailroom might be the guy you want to go after because he gets all the mail. Isn't that funny? The guy in the mailroom gets all the mail.
I didn't get it.
I'm
Did
smart. Yeah, so abuse policies, especially at big corporations, if you start to see your system administrator making late night changes to the PBX, I don't know, talk to him about it. He might be doing something. And obviously, I'm skipping over a lot of this because we're plus 15. Do you have a plus 15 sign? Instead of like a 10 minutes, no, you don't? Sorry, I'm going to continue.
Excellent.
And here we go. Thank you. I'm going to skip this. This is just, organizations can minimize their risk through education and policy. Again, it's vigilance and common sense. So educate your employees and say, if your voicemail calls you, at the orientation, if your voicemail calls you, don't give it the PIN number. Call it back. Call it. It shouldn't call you. It's a machine.
Really, to make this short, because people are getting itchy, really, everybody should just be analyzing whether or not these vulnerabilities are related to or in effect are going to affect their particular corporation and incorporate it into your threat model. That's all you have to do. And then just look at the actual risks, weigh them, say which ones are important to you, and then build policy. Make sure everybody understands that policy, make everybody sign a little piece of paper that says, no, I'm not going to get owned by Nick, and then you're good. That's really all it comes down to.
And I know we weren't, again, doing GSM and tower fuzzing. I know we weren't completely breaking GSM crypto. But given that we had the worst GSM talk at Blackhat, I hope everybody enjoyed it. And that is the end of our presentation.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.